Joining us to talk more about this is New York Times political reporter Maggie Astor. Maggie, thank you so much for joining us. The push to change election laws because of voter confidence is nothing new, but how is what's happening now different from past attempts?
Well, it's different in both the volume and in some substantive ways. The amount of disinformation that was spread about the 2020 election with President Trump's false claims of fraud and many of his supporters amplifying those claims, it was a much more broad and frankly effective disinformation campaign than we have seen after previous elections.
You all know by now that Project Veritas has won on motion to dismiss against the New York Times for defamation. The New York Times printing an original article saying we are part of a coordinated disinformation campaign, that we were deceptive. The New York Times defense was that their statements there were, quote, unverifiable expressions of opinion. The judge in New York saying to the New York Times that they were the ones engaged in deception and disinformation, interjecting their opinion in an A-section news article.
But the efforts that are happening now are not grappling with the fact that the lack of trust is fueled by a concerted disinformation campaign. And that is what academic experts and people who study disinformation are pointing out, that it is essentially a self-reinforcing cycle, because you have the lies about election fraud, and those decrease voter confidence, and then the politicians cite the lack of voter confidence in a sort of vicious circle.
And it's all founded on disinformation, right?
The Times' own policy effectively requires New York Times reporters and journalists to reach out to subjects for comment, and the New York Times admits that they didn't do that. Quote, New York Times admits that Ms. Astor, her editors, and the New York Times did not reach out to Mr. Muhammad for comment. The New York Times, all you had to do was pick up the phone and call him, and Muhammad would have said, that was me, that was my Snapchat, and I recorded myself. But you didn't do that. And maybe you didn't do it because if you did do it, you'd have to publish that it was real. But what you put in your A-section news article, you said that we were, quote, making claims without evidence. You didn't even pick up the damn phone and make a phone call. And you call yourself journalists.
And is there any coming back from this? Is this something that can be controlled eventually?
Well, I can't really speak to whether it can be controlled eventually. I think that is something that disinformation experts are really grappling with. They're really grappling with the best ways to combat it, because it is much easier, and that doesn't mean it's easy, but it is much easier to prevent disinformation from spreading and taking hold in the first place than it is to mitigate the effects once it is out there. Because, as you said, it does, take on a life of its own.
And speaking of only reporting the narrative they wanted to tell, remember how the New York Times said that I was part of a, quote, coordinated disinformation campaign, at least in part because I embargoed the material with people who had a platform that could publicize these videos, people like Mike Lindell. I met with him. I shared with him an advanced copy of our journalism. The Times now admits that Maggie Astor, wait for it, she was given an embargoed copy of this election integrity report. The New York Times did the very thing they accused us of. If that's considered, quote, disinformation campaign or a coordinated disinformation campaign, then the New York Times would be engaging in a coordinated disinformation campaign by doing embargoed copies of things right before they're published. It's asinine. It's irrational. It's outrageous. It's defamation is what it is. Or as the prominent Canadian vlogger has stated, it's just plain old projection, Dean Baquet.
Remember what we always say on this channel, hashtag confession through projection, because it looks like that is exactly what the New York Times did themselves.
Disinformation, 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 disinformation.
They didn't call Liban Muhammad for comment, even though their ethics policy requires them to. They doubled down saying that all this stuff might be false, but it's just our opinion. They claim that we were coordinated disinformation, but apparently engaged in coordinated disinformation because they did the thing they accused us of doing, namely embargoing material and receiving advanced copy material with their friends who are opining about us. They had a pull quote in that print article saying that we presented no evidence of any illegal voter fraud, but when under oath, they admit that it was in fact illegal to harvest more than 3 ballots.
Disinformation, 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 disinformation.